Hello and welcome to ChariTepulse, your regular update on news and happenings in the charity sector. I'm James Saunders. I'm a partner at Moore Kingston Smith Accountants. I'm joined as ever by my co-hosts, Catherine Rostromji, partner and head of charities at Shakespeare Martineau, and Charles Mesquita, charities director and general good guy at Quilter Cheviot. You may be listening to us on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or YouTube or any of our respective organisations' websites. However you're listening, you're very welcome, but please don't forget to like and follow or subscribe and generally hit any positive feedback buttons you can for us, presuming, of course, that you do find our little sessions useful. And we're recording this on Budget Day, it's the 30th of October, 2024. So I'm in my office, and obviously at a firm of accountants, there's quite a bit of frantic activity going out there as they prepare for the Chancellor's announcements later on today. But in other news, less tax related, we've got a few charity sector topics to cover off this week. So we're going to dive straight in and actually picking up kind of where we left off last time with the news that the covenant is being developed. That's the new contract agreement, if you like, between the new Labour government and the charity sector. We've had some more analysis and thoughts these last week or 10 days or so about what the covenant might look like. From anything from once in a generation opportunity to let's not make sure we haven't got any just warm words. So I think reception seems to be positive. Generally wary that obviously it's not just a rehash of an old compact or compact Mark II maybe. There is commentary that it won't have legal force. It's a should do, not a must do. It'll follow those four principles of transparency, recognition, participation, and partnership. Catherine, I'm going to come to you first. Does all that sound reasonably positive to you?
Does, I think, yeah, and as the article says as well, people shouldn't be sniffy about the compact's shortcomings, and so in general, yeah, I thought the article, the feedback from the interaction with Number 10 all does seem to be really positive. So I think the sector should embrace that and make of it what it can. I thought it was interesting the various people that were invited to that event and be useful to have their views put across to say, look, we need more than just warm words. We need more than this. I thought it was interesting on Budget Day because even now, so long after COVID, we're still hearing that NHS is favoured and charities delivering NHS services are completely forgotten and not included in the mix. So I think charities have got to get their voice heard. So if this helps to be seen to be an important partner, and talking about the number of people who work in the charity sector, I thought, well, yeah, it's about time recognition was given where it's due.
Yeah, I think the consultation is still open. I'm sure it's still open. So we would encourage everyone to contribute if you can and want to trying to see what that's going to look like. Charles, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's very tempting, isn't it, to go, oh, we've seen this all before, and you want to be positive, and I think there is an intent particularly from Starmer and from Lisa and Andy to reset the relationship, and I think that's a really good thing. I suppose my worry is how deep does that go down? I was thinking about the previous compact, which had originated under Blair Brown government in 1998, and then it was reaffirmed under the Cameron-Clegg in May 2011, and then sort of quietly left to drop. There were several things that came out of that, wasn't it? It was voluntary. I was trying to think of, have there been any lasting benefits or things from that original compact? I can't think of a single thing, although there was a hell of a lot of money, I think, pumped into these initiatives. So to my mind, I think that, so the two things I think the charity sector needs to do, I think it needs to change its narrative. And instead of, historically, the sector's been very good at pointing out what the problems are and then looking to government to solve them. And I think we've actually, as a sector, got to take our own initiative and change that narrative into a much more of a solutions-based situation of where the benefit is would be my first thing. And the second thing that always worries me is that this is an unequal relationship because it comes back down to money. The Treasury holds the purse strings. There isn't any more money. They've already made that point and flagged it up. But that relationship it's always slightly the charity. It feels like the charity sector is going cap in hand asking for money, where actually what they're doing is delivering a lot of fantastic services and enriching our society as a result of it. So, if I think that whatever they do, and I really hope it does work, but it needs to be lasting and it needs to be a cultural change on both sides.
So that actually leads into or goes back to an interview that Lisa and Andy did a couple of weeks ago, I think, where she was talking about restoring charities to the centre of national life. But in particular, in that article and that interview, there was commentary from the chief exec of the National Council for Voluntary Organisations, where she was flagging in particular that charities delivering public service contracts struggle from inflation not keeping up with the real costs. And she made the point at that time there needs to be just charities talking to the charity minister isn't enough. They've got to have links into the Treasury, Charles, exactly as you described. And she actually characterised it not as cap in hand, but as an important change maker, and a real decision maker in there, a contributor rather than just simply a beneficiary, which I think is a refreshing attitude to go into that kind of relationship with all those discussions. Is that fair, Charles?
Yeah, but then change the way that they go out and do the funding, because if every 2 or 3 years you've got to go in for this competitive funding, you're wasting an awful lot of money. I think the relationship has just got to change in the whole way. So yes, if they're able to do it, then fantastic, and I'll applaud them. But again, we have seen this before, and good intentions don't end up necessarily in reality.
There was also talk about working to incentivize the population to give more gift aid, which has been a long bugbear of our podcast. And indeed, I think it's fair to say, as well as having a consultation on the nuts and bolts of the gift aid by HMRC, the last government was on a journey to look at this. The Labour government seems to have picked it up and seems to be quite keen on it. However, at the same time, I said earlier, it's budget day today. Employers' national insurance is going to go up by the sounds of things. That's going to hit charities as much as anything else. So suddenly, it's not even giving and taking with the different hands. You're not quite sure even that charities aren't going to be worse off from after today. They probably are. But yeah, so that was an interesting sort of run through on the government situation. Turning to a slightly different story, there was a reporting this week of Chris Sherwood, who is the outgoing chief exec of the RSPCA. I think generally we seem to agree that he's done quite a good job where he is in difficult circumstances. But he was describing being a CEO of an organisation such as that as a quote, being in a goldfish bowl. And particularly what I was struck by was the way that he's describing that tightrope that they have to walk between being an advocate and a supporter of a subsector of a particular sector of the charity sector of the population, while also not getting into trouble with public perception and also government and or charity commission. And that's we've talked about this before, but very, very difficult paradox, if you like, to try and deal with at the moment. Catherine, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I thought it was a really interesting article, and I think to have that comment, you do wonder about some of the motivations, I think, when people are reporting. When his comment was, I've seen stuff we've done in the organisation then appear in the press several days later. And I do wonder about, whether that's trustees, whether that's employees, but where's your loyalty to your employer and the organization you're working with. But also the fact is you can't please everybody all the time. And I think, this is where it's not the expression that the previous government has used about charities sticking to their knitting, but I think it is the point of drawing a line that says, this is our framework, this is what we're doing. And I think, just from the outside looking in, he really seems to have turned the organization around, got it much more back on track, back with that positive image, and the way that society thinks of the RSPCA now in a positive way again, rather than for a time it was a really troubled charity. So I thought he's done a great job, but clearly it's not easy. And I thought it was useful of him to share those comments.
And Charles, you're a fan, aren't you, I think?
Yeah, I mean, I've met Chris on a couple of occasions, and I have to say he's a very impressive individual. He has done a truly remarkable job. I mean, the RSPCA, when he took over 6 years ago, was in absolute shambles. They had a series of chief executives and then trustees moving in as acting chief executives while they were looking at it. The trustee board was, I think, coming from the membership, which was shrinking. There were a whole lot of issues around, hunting and that, and farming practices and cheap food, animal welfare standards. They had internal disputes and culture and everything else. So actually his ability, and the Charity Commission, in fact, I think had done at least 2 investigations into the RSPCA, and there was criticism of the Charity Commission not doing more around governments because they were such a high profile charity. So the fact that he stabilized that ship and put it onto an even keel and to settle down and has navigated, I think, what is really complex areas, I think he should be applauded and held up as a fantastic example of what a really good chief executive should be for an organization of this stature.
I mean, and turning to particularly that delicate balance between doing the right thing and advocating and the public perception. That only just this, I just found, having had a quick look, 2 reports of charities being criticised or getting into trouble over social media posts in particular. One of the Conservative leadership candidates had a pop at one charity, which ended up with them deleting social media posts. I was struck, actually, but this wasn't, the phraseology. It wasn't just a complaint to the charity that they, it was the wording, accused it of peddling divisive statements. It's very inflammatory in its own right. But anyway, the charity deleted social media posts. Another charity criticised by the Charity Commission over multiple inappropriate social media posts. So it's obviously an area of focus for the Charity Commission. It's obviously an area of real uncertainty for charities. It's a dangerous world. I think we all agree on that. The social media policy is something that the Charity Commission is keen for everyone to have. But I think, Charles, you've got some experience of trying to put a social media policy together.
Yeah, I mean, because I think it was Generic, wasn't it, who was, could politicians please stop turning around every time there's any issue and saying they must have the charity's charitable status removed? Because that shows just such ignorance on their behalf, and perhaps actually more of them should become trustees to actually understand how charities function and work. So that would be a plea on my basis. Yeah, I think social media policy is a really interesting one. I think really challenging for trustees. Because you have this problem here of posting on behalf of the organization, but individuals posting in their own right, and how do you get the right balance so that actually it doesn't damage the organization? And we've just, for one of the organizations, in fact, I've got the board meeting happening today where we're going to be approving the policy, and it is complex. There is no doubt about it. And I think the other issue, certainly, with boards being possibly older, where they didn't grow up with social media, you've got a whole lot of stuff that people are doing of a younger generation, I think of my children, playing around with, which I have no understanding or concept of or power. And then, of course, as we've spoken in previous sessions of this around Twitter and X and charities actually coming off that for around mis or disinformation going on. So I think this is probably sort of not dissimilar in a funny way to safeguarding policies, but obviously not quite in the same magnitude, but that we're all going to have to come to terms with and come up with. I don't know whether you, Catherine, are being asked by your clients to help put together a policy.
Less so. And I think the issue more has been about control. I think how decisions are made by a collective group of trustees and what is the view of the charity and who has got the logon details for the social media accounts. Because there's quite often a mismatch with whoever is putting out the tweet in real time doesn't have authority, hasn't had that checked, isn't supervised and isn't authorized to make it. So that's where the trustees need to get a grip to say, well, you're ultimately responsible for what happens within your organization. So I think there's more a piece around how charities collectively put their view across and can they ever do that and should they be? And I'd absolutely agree about MPs just, I don't know why the obsession with charities, what they're doing, why they need to respond. It's like, dog whistle politics where they just seem unable to resist. And you think you've got other things you are meant to be doing. But I also think that the social media policy, just in isolation, isn't the issue. I think it's a much bigger piece and a reflection of, is there a weakness in their governance, in their reporting, in their oversight, perhaps?
Can I just make one other comment, just because it's cropped up in our policy? It's, of course, a lot of the time we talk about staff and our policy to staff, but of course, the policy needs to go to trustees and volunteers, because we're and okay, fine, I think trustees at the moment may not be using social media as much, just purely because of the age profile, but that is going to become a much bigger issue, I think, as the generations come through and the use of that is more familiar to people.
Back to Catherine's point about governance and internal procedures, and that actually links nicely into another slightly disappointing story. Trustee resigns after the charity where he was a trustee gave or loaned almost £300,000 to linked companies. This is difficult to read, really. I mean, this is about a former chair of the Brighton Rainbow Fund submitted his resignation after it came to light that money had gone from that charity to linked charities. Now, it's important to say non-profit, so there isn't a suggestion immediately that it's private gain, which we have seen before and talked about before in some charities where trustees have pocketed money themselves, but that's not quite what's being reported here. But this is still about a lack of transparency and perhaps a lack of understanding on, what seemed to be a quite, experienced trustee of how transparent you need to be in those internal decision makings around related party transactions and how important it is to make sure that record keeping is correct and some governance is correct. Catherine, is that fair?
Yeah, I think so. And I mean, we don't know whether there's any real issue here because it's almost as, I suppose, that charity trying to get in front of the issue because it says the commission is assessing concerns and determining whether it has a regulatory role. But to me, it just screamed of a lack of understanding about managing conflicts of interest, that it's not determined by whether there's a personal gain. There is a clear conflict of interest where this individual is also on the board of two other entities, and this charity has made loans to those entities. Doesn't look great. I think the optics are poor. I think they also should be thinking about reputational damage as well as conflicts of interest. And then the final bit I got a bit pedantic about was he says he's resigned, but he hasn't. He's submitted his resignation, which will take effect once a new trustee is appointed. So they're clearly down to the minimum number required of the trustees, which is why he isn't able to effect his resignation until that's sorted out. So again, it just seemed to be the governance seemed poor, seemed weak for an organisation potentially of this scale, because they're talking about funds nearly £300,000. So, I mean, it was not small amounts that are being passed around. And it seemed disappointing that wasn't identified and managed better.
Charles, any thoughts?
I mean, I think like all these things, we're all going to face conflicts of interest. To me, the test is if you then have to go and explain it to the Charity Commission or to the regulator or to the press, perhaps the BBC, can you do it hand on heart without feeling uncomfortable that you've made a decision in the best interest of your organisation? So I think people need to sometimes take a step back, and they need to be. And the other thing I would say is that these things are actually important issues that should be discussed in board meetings, have a good airing, and record what your conclusions from that discussion have, so that actually, if you are challenged, you can go back and revisit it.
And that to me is actually the extra bit that you just caught on there, which is recorded all as well. I mean, certainly when we do our audit work with charities, we focus a lot on recorded declarations of interest now, where you have to fill these things out, not just trustees, management teams, key management personnel, as we refer to them. Anyone who could have any influence on any decision making, make those declarations of interest, get them signed, get them completed, get them recorded. People use Google Forms and all sorts of things these days, although you've got to be careful about making sure you save them, because otherwise they disappear off into the ether. But there are, easier ways of doing it than just trying to get people to complete paper forms. You've got to get them done these days. Last point, UK charities fear first-class stamp rise in price will mean fewer Christmas cards sent out, which is very sad. Obviously, Christmas cards, big deal for charities, always have been. Charles, how much is a first-class stamp?
Not sure I have a clue. I was going to guess £1, but I suspect I'm wrong.
30p increase too. Catherine,
I went to the post office yesterday, to my favourite post office. Lady there called Kath served me. She's my favourite. A first-class stamp now costs £1.65.
What?
For one
exactly
stamp.
Correct, yeah. 30p increase, so it's gone up by 30p to 165. So 165 to send a Christmas card.
It's a lot.
Yeah, that is a lot these days, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's funny.
You can send out an email or a text or a WhatsApp or whatever.
I was trying to remember the last time I bought a stamp, and in fact, I have a letter to post, and then I was trying to work out where am I going to go and buy the stamp, because of course most post offices have closed down.
Yeah. Anyway, please keep buying stamps and sending sending Christmas cards, definitely, however you can get them around. Hey, go and hand deliver them. That would be a lot more safer, wouldn't it?
So what is a second-class stamp then? Do we know what that is?
85 pence.
Oh,
yeah.
That used to be 50p. I do remember that.
Yeah.
Okay, that's probably all we have time for this week. We've covered an awful lot of ground there. So thank you, Catherine. Thank you, Charles. And thank you to the listener for tuning in to this episode of Charity Pulse. We hope you found the discussion insightful. And if you have any questions or topics you'd like us to cover in future episodes, please do let us know. Whether you're a charity professional or a passionate volunteer or simply someone who cares about making a difference, we do aim to try and ensure that there's something there for everyone. Don't forget, please follow us, leave a review, share our podcast with your network, and join us next time as we continue to explore the challenges and the opportunities facing charities, non-profits and voluntary organisations. Thanks very much. Bye-bye for now.